Welcome back, everyone. Thanks a lot for coming back. Thanks especially if you watched that entire marathon episode of Building a Fast Tracks Turnout. I know that wasn't necessarily for everybody, and maybe not the most riveting or exciting thing. Hopefully the end result is something that you can see value in and is worthwhile. But today's video is going to be about the details and all the little things that end up making your layout more than just some buildings and some track and trains. The little things of life, if you will, that maybe go unnoticed that we use every day, but you don't really pay attention to. But when you put onto a layout, it kind of brings the scene together. One of the more there's a lot of great modelers out there that have done this, but in my opinion, kind of one of the pioneers, in my opinion, in this is the Franklin in South Manchester by George Sellios. And if you ever have an opportunity, I think there's several videos on YouTube. There's multiple books dedicated. Obviously, he owns and runs Fine Scale Miniatures, which I think he's no longer producing anymore. But his Craftsman kits were always outstanding. But what was really unique about his layout is that he brought everything to life. Some people would say it looks cluttered, but for the era that he was modeling, that Depression era modeling that he did, everything was gritty and compact and dirty, and especially that area of the country, was where everybody was. That was the hub of and the heart of the U.S. at the time, and all those details brought the layout and made it more than just trains running around the layout. It really made it a diorama, if you will, and a recreation of an era. I by no means am anywhere near his level, but I like to, now that I'm to the point where the layout is nearing a state of completion with the rough scenery, now it's time for the small things. And so some of the things that I thought I'd touch on, and I highlighted them in the tour video, for instance, was these just like rolling trash bins. And again, you can get these on Shapeway. I looked them up, and they're actually, the cheapest I found them was about $10 for a single one of these. And I couldn't find them in HO scale anymore. I only was able to find them in O scale. You can get the little wheelie bins that you put out, for trash day, recycle bins and stuff like that. Those you can get, and which would be really cool to have too. I might have to figure out how to make those. But this is all from scrap parts. It's styrene, but then the lids themselves these are the corrugated panels of a Walthers auto rack that I put together, a kit that I put together years ago. There were leftover panels. The wheels themselves are from sprues I just sliced. And it's kind of the theory that detail doesn't necessarily have to be, everything perfect. You look at this, and I hope that you see that this is a trash bin. It doesn't have to look exactly like a trash bin. It doesn't have to exactly replicate a real trash bin. I'm not a rivet counter. But I'm hoping that if you look at this, you go, oh, hey, trash bin, close enough. And that's what I'm after here. And that's the same. I'm also going to touch on making, construction barrels that you see all over. Again, will they be perfect? Will they be exact replicas? No, but they'll be close enough that when you put them on the layout, you put them on a roadway, you go, construction barrel. I know those. I hate those. The other thing that I'm kind of doing here is a lot of what I'm doing is I've got a big bin of parts. This is only a part of it. Here's the rest of it, and this is just leftovers from kits, and you have all these things, and I save them. I can't get rid of this stuff. It's like I might need it somewhere. Here's like the top part of the grain towers that I made, a while back, right here. This is a piece from that, can't throw it out. Same with this, that was all part of it. you never know when that stuff's going to come in handy, and that's where the barrels come from. The barrels are actually, I just turn the, cut this out, and then we'll turn this to, become a barrel. So I've talked long enough. I've been always accused of talking too much, so let's get started. Okay, before we get started, yeah, I'm going to talk some more, but this is an actual tip. So now we're into the hopefully meat of it. I use a lot of when you work with styrene, you can use a solvent to actually melt the styrene or soften it, if you will, and then the two pieces will kind of fuse back together as it recures. And you can get through Micromark sells what they call same stuff, which, if you remember, is 10X7R, was one of the first products out on the market. Micromarks is the same thing, and these bottles aren't that expensive. But in doing some investigation, I found out that basically the active product in this, and it actually says it right here on this plastic weld, that methyl ethyl ketone is the active ingredient in this. Now, there may be other parts in here. However, my research on the internet, and that never lies, right? You know, Abraham Lincoln said that anything you find on the internet is true. But so you can go to your hardware store. I don't actually I got this from Home Depot. But I believe your True Values, your Ace Hardware, will have this. So this entire container costs $10, and I've filled this up multiple times. And one of these from Micromark will run you $5 to $8 depending. And this unfortunately doesn't have a price tag on it. What the internet told me, and what I'm finding to be true, is all this is when you get a 10X7R, is there's bits of styrene already dissolved in here. So what they said was fill this up, drop a bunch of shavings, some pieces of styrene in, and you get essentially the same thing. And it doesn't thicken it up per se, but it puts some styrene in there, and I found that this works exactly the same. Now, I will warn you, and the warnings on the back of this thing are long. And if you want to pause it, zoom in, and try and read these. Anytime you work with this directly, this can be absorbed by the skin. So if it comes in contact with your skin, it's essentially like drinking it, I guess. I'm not a doctor, but I know that it's bad. So the recommendation is that you work with gloves, nitrile gloves, or like this has got a brush applicator, so you don't need to worry about it too much in that regards. But it's like any chemical, you need to be careful with it. But there's a little cost saver for you. If you can find methyl ethyl ketone, I will say that when you ask for it, people kind of look at you strange, like, you cooking meth? But no, I'm not cooking meth. I'm making, models for my layout. So anyway, so that's if you're running out of this, you can get methyl ethyl ketone, and it'll do the same thing. Okay, now let's start actually modeling. Okay, so a few things before we get started. As you can see, I've just collected a bunch of basically scrap. So styrene is, I try and find the thinnest styrene I can, just when making these bins. You can use thicker styrene, it's no big deal. I like to go with a thinner styrene. To make these where the forks go in when the truck comes, I have old, I think this is from a Walthers kit actually, but these were supposed to be gutters for the, actually this might be a Plastrux kit, I can't remember. But these are, it's just a U-shaped channel that I used. But you could use a solid piece and just paint it, put a little black dot on the end, and it'll look like it's hollow. So you by no means need this. And then here's the pieces that I was talking about for the lids, and these are the panels that would go on the side of an auto rack, and they were just left over. I just like this design, and then once painted black, it kind of looks like that corrugated top of them. Um, but again, you don't necessarily need, especially if you make it such that like one of them is up, well, you may not even be able to see the top of it. So just a piece painted black is plenty. And then the wheels I just cut out from just old sprue pieces, and I try and find like a gray or something like that, and then that way you really don't need to paint them. And even if they appear silver on the end here, it kind of looks like they're the holders. I don't know what the right term there would be, but the silver of the stainless of the wheel, and then the black showing kind of the wheel itself. So that's kind of what we're after. Rough dimensions, I went with a scale rule to just kind of make them. So I think I made it, so it was like 4 feet wide, 4 feet tall on the back side, and then 3 feet tall on the front side to create that. So then, so we need 2 pieces there. This piece, the bottom piece, and then the back side piece. So if you don't have a scale rule, I highly recommend it. I don't use this to actually cut. I have an old metal straight edge that I use to actually cut, just because I want to keep this in good shape. I don't want to actually accidentally start shaving this edge off, but comes in really handy. And then this one is just an old straight edge. The other thing I'll recommend, and I might have talked about this in a previous video, is this is just a piece of styrofoam that I hogged out the center of, and you can put your, I've got one for paint, you can see here, and then, but this one I use, and it helps, like if you bump it, you won't actually tip it over. It's a lot harder to tip these over, and so if you're little fumble fingers like I am, maybe it'll stay in place. The downside is that if you look closely here, because this is methyl ethyl ketone, it reacts with the styrofoam and kind of eats it away. So eventually I'll have to rebuild one of these. But okay, so let's get started. First, I'm just gonna use this old piece of scrap here and just start measuring out and then cutting. So there you go. That's pretty much all it took. I mean, you can see, you can paint it, you know, I won't go through the whole painting process of it. You know, you can paint them, these come in multiple colors, you know, at least in the area I've seen them green, blue, red, you know, whatever. Usually the tops are black because they're plastic. Um, so I go with a matte black or a flat black rather. These I painted green. Like I said, the wheels I didn't even paint on these. You really don't kind of need to. But there you go. That's a Wheeling trash bin. All right, so this one I didn't make these myself. These are Pike Stuff, or I'm sorry, these are Rix Products, you know, telephone poles. And the only thing that I did to them is they come in a brown color. So what I did is I took a razor saw, not this particular one, but just ran them along the long edge of the poles themselves, just to give them a little bit of a grain, if you will, and then pretty much just dry brushed. You know, a little bit of gray, and then you can, I don't know if you can see this, but I put a little bit of black down here. I think it was like dirty, just because, you know, they'll seal these, especially the part that goes into the ground. They'll seal them with a little bit of tar or creosote or whatever. I'm not positive what that chemical is. But then the other thing what I did was is that I trimmed off quite a few of these insulators on each one of them, and I kind of did them at random. And because you'll see that if you're modeling current and modern layouts, railroads rather, these kind of, they may be in use, but a lot of times they're just using them to carry from one of the like boxes that you'll see for a crossing guard or for a set of signals. Maybe these will carry the cables from that box to the signals themselves, but they're not really telegraph wires anymore, and pretty rarely are they, at least on the railroad. If you're using them for line poles throughout, like say your city scene, sure, these will still carry your cable, your electrical, and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of times these insulators are still around the railroad. They'll be knocked off because they've not really been used. So these are pretty simple, but another high detail part. There are good ways to wire these up and actually string wires between. I haven't gotten there yet, so I don't have that to show. So, but just a quick tip on these in terms of detailing. So what I have here is just actually this is a sheet of drywall sandpaper that's meant for like a drywall sand block. But what I did is I just took a piece of scrap 1x4 that I had laying around, stapled it to it, and just created a sanding block. And then get rid of this. I don't need this right now. So the reason I'm spinning it is to, in some ways, kind of almost putting these on a lathe. These aren't really round. So I'm trying to just make them a little bit more round, and this isn't going to work perfectly, but it's going to just help to take the edges off and get it a little bit more round. So then when I do, so one of the things I like to do is these usually have reflective white bands in them, so they're primarily orange, and then you'll get white bands in there of reflective material. So to help when I paint them, I like to just file a groove in them wherever I can, and to do that I just have a nice file, and this is a tri-sided, so it's got a nice like V cut into it, and just kind of at random. Sometimes it's easier to work closer to the chuck, and then you trim it from there. So you just kind of cut a little bit of a groove into it. You don't want to go too deep. And then move up a little bit. Oh. And what I like to do is you just kind of keep working your way up, and you just keep putting more notches in, and you just kind of space them out. And what I would do is I'd measure out, 4 feet, and then put 3 bands, 4 feet, another 3 bands, and you'll get 3 bands. Again, these are rough; they're not perfect by any means, but we're trying to get them close to what a barrel would look like. Once I've got a bunch of those in, then you can come back and trim it off, and now you've got the 3 bands cut in, and we'll paint this orange. So one of the last aspects of these is they always have a weighted base on them. Usually they put the barrel down and then the weight goes over the top of them, and there's usually a flange on the bottom. And so I have just a thicker, believe it or not, I believe this actually came from a balloon that came in a plant that I got my wife or the kids or something like that. But I found that it's a good diameter to go on the bottom of it, and although it has a hole in it, it really doesn't interfere. Now, you probably saw me using this weird contraption, and I'm not going to say that this is the safest thing in the world, but I don't have one of those Northwest Shortline choppers that I'd really like to have one of those, but right now I don't have one. And so this is kind of sort of a chopper, and so what I've done is just taken a razor blade, I've centered it in here, and you can see I haven't given, I've clamped it in there, and I didn't give it a whole lot of blade to flex. And so what I'll do here is I'll just kind of line up how thick I want it, and without cutting my finger off, that one's too thick. Let's try it again. There we go. So now you've got kind of a base for it, and you can just take some Plastrux weld again or whatever you're using. There you go, there's a construction barrel. So now through the magic of essentially the same thing, right? This is one that I made. This is one of the early prototypes, I guess you could call it, that I made. But you can see it's the basic concept. So there's the base, and then the orange was actually, I didn't have an orange color, so I tried to mix a color that I thought would line up well. And then you can see this one's got the bands that I put in there. It's a little sloppy. Like I said, this is an early prototype, but here's the one that I just put together, and you can see this one sits at a little bit of an angle, but you clean these up. Ooh, there it goes. You clean these up a little bit, and easy enough to make. I think the painting is probably the most tedious part of these, getting them to look right. But there you go, construction barrels for to annoy the occupants of whatever town you're modeling, because construction's always a wonderful thing. Well, there you go. A little bit shorter today. Hopefully, I guess I'll say that now. I haven't edited and put it together, but hopefully a little bit shorter than the hour-long Fast Tracks one. So those are just some of the details, though, that I've been trying to work on throughout the layout. And as I work on more, I'll just kind of touch on those. But I think honestly, to make a garbage bin really doesn't take long. Cutting the parts is probably the most tedious. Some of the details, like adding the lid edging, you wouldn't necessarily need to do. I did it just to kind of clean it up. When you have them open, it kind of cleans it up a little bit, but that can be kind of nice. And if you put both lids closed, you don't have to paint the inside of this thing, and saves a little bit more time. But again, it's little details like that you probably interact with garbage dumpsters, you know, all the time, or you see them, the back of a parking lot, you know, whatever. Yeah, they're there. They're part of life. You know, same thing with the telephone poles. They're always there. They're just, but it's something that when you add it into the scene, it helps tie it together and kind of ground it in reality, if you will. And the construction barrels, let's face it, we all see too many of those. But so anyway, I hope this was informative. I hope it was enjoyable, and you know, let me know what you think. And thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for sticking with me. And we'll see you next time.